Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Susan and I have a 50-minute conversation about what she's observing this year as she reacts and reads college applications and takes notes. Next, Julie and I take a question from Alex, a student from DC, and he has a simple question. Do the grades I get while I'm in college really matter? For our interview segment, Lynda has her final part of her interview with Ben Neely, the Chief Academic Officer for Revolution Prep, and they are discussing the new digital ACT. And there is no college spotlight this week because we did a session almost an hour with Susan in the news time. Friends, we've got a few announcements for you today. If you're not getting YCBK Plus, this is our monthly newsletter, and you're missing some interviews you probably haven't heard, some tips, some spotlights you probably haven't heard. And every month we provide links to outstanding articles about college and college admissions that are not behind a paywall that we never got to discuss on Your College Bound Kid. Now, the February newsletter will go out on February 20th. And on Monday's episode, I'll share exactly the articles that'll be in the February newsletter. But there's a lot going on in the news. Normally, we have 7 articles we link, and this month we have 10. Now, it's completely free. And I want to play a message that recently came in from a listener.
Good morning, YCBK. I was listening to episode 501 this morning, and you mentioned about the newsletter, which is something I'd always meant to sign up for. So I followed directions and went to the website to sign up. And I don't see anywhere on there that you can sign up for the newsletter. And I searched for newsletter and nothing came up. And it's not one of the drop-down options off of the menu. I thought it would be under resources, but I can't find it. So hate to complain in a speak pipe, but could you please explain how to sign up for the newsletter? Because I'm simply not finding how to do it. Many thanks.
Friends, this listener's not being difficult at all. I'm really grateful for this message because it helped me to explain that I didn't explain how to sign up very well. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, and on the right side of the page, along the border, you'll see a section that is shaded out in gray that says YCBK Plus, and it will just ask you 2 questions. Are you a student, parent, counselor, or other? And what is your email? That's it. I think the reason the listener missed it is because I didn't mention the name, which is YCBK Plus. I just was referring to it as Your College Bound Kid newsletter. So go ahead and sign up. I think you'll like the content we provide every month. Friends, our next Counselor Connect meeting is Sunday, February 23rd. And we had to temporarily stop taking in new counselors because we have over 100. We want to figure out what we're doing. We have speakers. We have small group discussions by counselor type. And Michelle is launching what I believe would be a very robust Slack channel. So if you want to be part of it, I still encourage you to go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, go to the resources section. You'll see Counselors Connect. Just like in regular admissions or early action or ED, when you apply early, don't get a decision right away. Applications stack on up. Different than rolling admissions. So we will be admitting more counselors later in 2025, but we first want to focus on serving the ones who have applied. Once we feel like we're really doing a good job, we'll open up the window and bring some more in. So If you want to go ahead and submit your app, it'll stay in a pile just like regular decision, early action, and early decision applications until the next application window. We just can't tell you what the release date will be yet, like they can often do in regular EA and ED. Friends, anyone who supports YCBK financially in 2025 will get YCBK swag. There's a donor button on our website, and you all are helping all of us by not having 18 minutes of commercials every hour, which is the average amount of commercials in a 60-minute production. Just know that we are working on these. Anitra, my wife, is taking this on as a big project. We have boxes of swag all in my office and another room in the house, ready to go out. But no, she has MS. The last couple of weeks have been challenging for her health. But know that your swag will arrive in March and April if you've given it all in 2025. Finally, we will go over the 400 number for questions from a listener this week, sent in via SpeakPipe. And know that we're going to be prioritizing your questions. One thing that really grinds my gears is when we can't answer a question till 4 to 6 months after somebody sent it in. And that's happened. So look to us to have more episodes where we run 2 QFLs and either pass on an article or the college spotlight, at least for the foreseeable future. We want to get you detailed answers to the questions you send in. And also look for more questions from a listener to be answered on our Monday episode before our interview. Okay, friends, let's dive in with my 50-minute conversation with Susan about questions from the thousands, about observations from the thousands of applications she's read this year.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Friends, I'm here with Susan Tree. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good, good. If I had half a voice, I would sing happy birthday to you. Susan had a big birthday.
Well, the Eagles gave me my birthday present last night, so I'm good.
Yeah, because your birthday was right on the Super Bowl, and boy, that was quite I know Philadelphia is celebrating today and all week.
They are. Well, Philadelphia fans, I'm a native New Yorker, so I'm accustomed to strong feelings around sports.
Sure.
But I knew nothing until I came to Philadelphia.
It's at a whole different level.
Oh, it's rabid.
I used to listen to that 610 AM station. I think it's WIP. I know it's still going there.
Oh, yeah.
I used to listen, and it was just for entertainment. I remember when I first moved to Philadelphia in 95, and I was actually at a pastor retreat in Charlottesville. This guy pulled me aside, and he says, there's a group of Philadelphia ministers, and he says, let me tell you something about Philadelphia fans. If you win it all, like you're godlike, anything else, you're a bum. and I thought, they're the ones that threw snowballs at Santa, remember?
That's right.
Anyway, we're getting off on a tangent.
But it's fun. I love a lot of spirit like that. And there's a lot of spirit in this area around college sports as well.
Sure. You got Villanova and then all the big five.
And Temple and
the history of the Big Five. The Big Five would play each other going back to maybe even the 50s.
Wow.
So, yeah. Awesome. Well, friends, I am really excited. There's probably almost nothing that I enjoy more on the podcast than reflections from reading files. Hillary did this last year. Throughout the year, she kind of took some notes when she knew we were going to have that activities discussion. And just so some things would be top of mind, she's reading and thinking of things when they grab her attention. So Susan reached out to me a while ago and said, I've been kind of taking some notes about some things I'm observing in the reading room. Would you be interested in me sharing? And I was like, would I be interested in you sharing? Can we do it now? So I'm very excited, and I'm just going to let Susan take it where she wants to go. But we know it's going to be good, and I'm all ears as much as our audience is.
Well, I think it's really interesting to hear, it's one thing to hear from full-time admissions people who are in the profession. And when I was, the first 12 years of my career, when I was at a very selective small liberal arts college in New England, we were we were at the forefront of holistic admissions and the test optional movement. And part of our mission when I was at Bates was getting to the public, empowering the public to understand the process and demystify it, because selectivity was increasing fast. It was in the 1980s and the 1990s, it was a period of tremendous growth in colleges' applicant pools. One of the big reasons is there had been a population decline, a very significant population decline in the 70s and into the 80s, particularly in the populated industrial states in the North. And a lot of colleges realized that their feeder states, the geographic areas that gave them the most applicants reliably over the years, were actually the ones that were going to be diminishing significantly. I remember getting debates and someone saying that the state of Massachusetts would be graduating half as many high school graduates in a decade. And we were in the middle of that decade at that time. And that's a huge feeder state for, most of the Northeast. But anyway, that said, we did not pull into a defensive posture at that time. Instead, we said we need to educate the public, pull the curtain back so that parents and kids could see and focus on the parts of the application process over which they had control, and not feel like they were being dragged along by mystical unseen powers, and that their hard work wasn't going to matter anyway. Right? Because the same continues today. And it's interesting, I was on the secondary side for, over 2 decades, and then bounced back to reading applications about 7 years ago, right before the pandemic. And I started reading for a mid-sized research university with a very strong STEM focus. And then a few years ago, I made the decision that I wanted to change to a college that read applications by committee review. And Mark, I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but there are some colleges that still read by geographic territory, and the admissions staff member who is who's responsible, they call them the territory manager, is usually the first reader of those applications. And occasionally they hire part-timers like me, either people who are on hiatus from their professional work, maternity leave, retirement, maybe they're in grad school and they're looking for work. But anyway, the university where I first read, it was a solo reading experience, meaning I did the whole first initial review of the application before it went to the territory manager to look at more school groups and geo-territories. It was a great experience for me to be back in that world, but it was also very solitary. This was my first online experience, and I was not part of a strategic team at the university. And there was too much of that in me from my past work, both on the college and the high school level, that I decided that holistic admission really was going to be best accomplished through committee-based evaluation. So the university where I've read now, this is my 4th year, is very selective. I read in tandem 6 hours a day from November through the month of February. And this is kind of typical if our listeners are interested in how part-timers like me support the evaluation process. The burden of decision always rests on the professional staff member, and almost always the territory manager. Although where I read now, this is how it goes. I read in tandem on Zoom. The territory manager and I have, because of how committee-based evaluation is designed, we have specific responsibilities for opening. We open a new application on the reading platform, which is partially designed by the colleges themselves, how they want to see what that comes in. But we see the whole PDF just as the students fill it out. So we're not reading a docket, we're not reading excerpts. And I believe this is pretty much true, and this is important for our listeners to realize, especially parents, as you support your kids as they're filling out applications. You have an opportunity to see that PDF. You can look at it section by section when you're filling out. When I say you, I'm hoping the student is doing all the filling out, of course. We can do it section by section, or you can see it at the very end when you press the review and submit button. Critically important. And maybe, Mark, that should be the first reflection that I make, is it's so obvious to a reader when there has not been a review of the completed PDF.
What are the telltale signs, Susan?
The telltale signs are things as simple as in the writing portions of the Common App or the Coalition app, the spacing has gone wonky. And sometimes it actually looks like one uni paragraph. And I know in a case like that would a student really not write multiple paragraphs? Once in a while, you get the feeling that it really is a one paragraph piece of writing, which makes it a statement and not an essay. And I think that's why I'm really careful with students, high school students that I work with, to always call it the personal essay, because it's not a statement. Part of the challenge of writing the personal essay is that you're showing the colleges you know how to write an essay. And that involves more than one paragraph. And it usually involves some form of introduction, description, reflection, and conclusion. It doesn't have to be that mechanical, but a good essay has to have a format to it. So sometimes if the formatting has not been proofread, it places the burden on the admissions reader to see whether or not it was a technical error. But it's, parents and kids, you never want to make this harder for the admissions reader.
Have you noticed, Susan, I'm sure you're probably getting more than 90% Common App as opposed to Coalition. I would think that'd be less than 10%.
No, it's a little more than that, I would say.
15?
Not much, but maybe 20%
okay.
Coalition.
Oh, I'm surprised. So that's a question I like to ask schools. What percentage of your apps are Coalition and Common App? And that's on the high side. But I don't see that with Common App, with like when my students, because I go through the review with them where we hit, and I can't remember one time on the Common App when I have seen it bunched together. It's the spacing is there when they hit the review.
Well, chances are if that happened, they've already caught it when they're working with a counselor, either a school-based counselor or, a coach on the outside. But I'm surprised how often I see what I would call wonky stuff going on in the application.
Mm-hmm. So give examples of wonky stuff.
Well, particularly in the essay where there is not a space in between paragraphs or there's not indentation.
Yeah, I know what that's like to read. It is really hard on a reader. It
is. And you know what? These little things they are not the kiss of death. I would never want a family to think that one punctuation error, one spacing or formatting error,
or spelling as well.
Yeah, but it's often an accumulation. What it says is that the student did not follow the directions on the application to do a print preview before they sent it in. Because if they did, and then they didn't correct this. So that and misspellings are the two most obvious things. I mean, the quality of essay crafting is a whole nother thing to talk about. Kids write at different levels. They have different sophistication when it comes to the skills of thinking and writing. And that's not so much what we're measuring on the college side. We're happy to listen to a student speak with their own authentic voice that represents their background, the kind of school they go to, the way they choose to express themselves. So sophistication, I think a lot of families are, you don't sound like you're IV material or whatever. I read some very thoughtful, straightforward, simple, well-spoken essays, and they're magnificent. And then I read essays from kids who clearly come from privilege that are sloppy. So, misspellings, you might not believe that there are misspellings. Mark, do you know what the most commonly misspelled word is on college applications? In my humble perspective,
There, THEIR versus THERE.
psychology.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Second is business.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's funny is that's the way it was for me 40 years ago when
As some things
applications
never
were
change.
when they were handwritten. But there isn't
Wow.
spell check in Common App,
Huh.
right?
Well, that's why you're kind of encouraged to do it in in Google Doc or something,
Absolutely.
and then have Grammarly connected, and Grammarly will catch those kinds of things for you. Although
Absolutely.
you have
And
to be careful with that too sometimes.
absolutely. And anyone has access to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you get a little jaded over time when you read. I was trying to count up what my average per week is. If I'm reading probably 300 applications a week, that's a lot of folks read much more than that. But as a first reader in committee based, it's a slower and more detailed. No one reads the applications in greater depth than the first team. And I think there's a misperception about that the first time your application is read, you're getting 6 minutes and the clock is on. I know the University of California system has an astronomical expectation for their first readers. And that's why their application is so structured. There's, very specific, shorter limits and topics. And, it's a different way of reading because, and interestingly, the UC readers are paid by the application as first readers, where other people are paid a salary or an hourly wage.
Yeah, I find it's all over the place when I talk to people in terms of how long they're taking on an application, or even how many applications an admission officer reads in a year.
That's right. And it depends.
Yeah.
The first readers, I read all over the United States because each day of the week I work with a different territory manager. So you become, and having been in admissions for quite a while myself, I kind of know schools in different regions, but they do that on purpose so that you don't get into kind of a mentality. There is a territory school by school check later in the process than where I am not reading by school groups unless we notice in our queue for the day that there are, a whole bunch of students from the same high school. I was reading New Jersey public schools, for example, a lot this winter, and we would look at our queue, which actually the territory manager would have created. And we would look at groups, but it was not the whole applicant group from that high school. I mean, we did EDs first,
Sure.
then we're doing regulars. But here's an interesting observation. So since kind of the first of the year, maybe even late December, I've been reading applications in the regular review, and the quality has gone way down.
Yeah.
The later, and this is a generalization, parents and students, if you're listening, don't say, oh, that's not possible, but think about it. I think students who apply places at the last minute may not do the careful work that they did on applications that they took their time with in the fall, and it really hurts them.
I think that's consistent with what almost everyone will tell you that I talk to. There's a difference. There's a difference between the person that knew ahead of time this is what they wanted to do and put some time into it. Of course, there's always exceptions, but you do hear that pretty consistently from admit, and that's why sometimes it can be really hard to suss out what is even the ED advantage? Even the ED advantage is hard to suss it out, really, because athletes are in there, you know, faculty, kids, alumni tend to be in there, and often stronger applications are applying early. So just using here's the ED admit rate versus the regular admit rate and saying, that's a
Yep,
sloppy way, and saying, oh, it's 4.7 times easier ED. That's a real sloppy analysis.
that's right. Because the students who are in that, and it's different for EA. I'd say in
Sure.
EA, you have more of a generalized applicant pool, whereas ED, of course, because it's a binding commitment.
And here's an example of how it's even different. So, Hillary has brought this point up because Colorado College doesn't charge
Right.
an app fee. They can really see a difference in regular, where people can go on and say, "Oh, no app fee," So it's just, yeah. That's I think one thing that makes this work so fascinating is there's, Baskin Robbins, 32 flavors or whatever. There's like what 2,275 flavors out here. I mean, not quite, but there's so much variety.
Well, and the one piece of advice anybody can take is answer the questions,
Mm-hmm.
because the application you filled out for one college, you might say, "Oh, I can just cut and paste the supplemental questions." The problem is that you can't always. They may be a similarly posed question, but for example, most colleges will talk about your leading academic interest and what led you to identify that as either your point of entry if you're applying directly to a division of study, or kind of a sense of this is where you're headed. And some colleges want to know that for your first and your second choice. And some colleges fold into that question, what is it about this college or this university that will help you advance in that area of study? Some colleges split those up into different short questions. Some combine them. And if you don't answer it the way that it's written, it's a giveaway that you haven't paid. I read an application this morning, in fact, where the student answered that question without mentioning the first choice major. They didn't even name it. Now, that's a little unusual.
But what you're talking about, Susan, is extremely common.
Yeah.
So I see it with my students, and not reading the prompt, or not answering the prompt. I think it's so common. I've sometimes scratched my head why it's happening so much, but I think it's a combination of a few things. I think people don't realize how every word is carefully chosen.
That's right.
So when they say something like, "Why are you interested in studying, your major at our school?" You better go in and tailor that to your school.
Right.
And I do think a lot of times, I wouldn't say I think, I would say I know, because I see it. Students think they can just repurpose and save a bunch of work. And I find that that's only true about 10% of the time that you can actually do that. There are a few questions. Let's say one of them is an extracurricular activity that you're very excited about or something. That's very generic, doesn't mention the school. It's not any affinity aspect at all. But even there, one might be 150 and one might be 300 words. So you still, but that is very, very obvious when someone has just taken an essay and copied, pasted, and moved it over. So I know you see a lot of that, because there's a lot of
And
people without
sometimes
guidance.
if you're saying why you want to major in philosophy or neuroscience or whatever, your kind of your thesis for that answer, your topic sentence could be the same,
Sure.
because these pieces of writing in applications are to help the college get to know you. And it's very important that as an applicant, you don't tell the college why it's great. They already know they're great. I already know that the university that I read for has a top 10 business and finance program.
Don't you find, Susan, it's almost like nails on a chalkboard when a student starts talking about the school's ranking or
Absolutely.
anything like that? They think they're paying you homage or giving you a compliment.
It is. You're right.
Yeah,
They're buttering us up. But, maybe they did discover a particular college because it was on a list of a rankings list. Maybe that was the beginning of their discovery, but it should never be why they finally decided to apply. I should learn something new about every student from the why this major supplemental question. What I'm in it for is to learn something new that I didn't know, maybe I saw evidence for it, on the transcript, in the essay, certainly in the recommendations and the activities. But there may be something brand new there. So if all you're saying to me is, oh, I want to take, international finance with Professor Stucker because, he's world renowned. But if a student says to me, I actually used a paper written by Professor Stucker on Greek currency and the impact of, I'm making this up,
sure.
The impact of, the natural disaster, blah, blah, blah. And that was my beginning of understanding the kind of scholarly work going on in his department. That's different. That's
Sure.
where I'm learning something about the applicant who came upon, this piece of scholarship, and then it helped the student do a deep dive into what the program. So they're saying the same thing, but they're saying it in a way where I learn something about that student that impresses me.
Friends, what Susan said about I want to learn something I don't already know about you is so important that this really applies to almost every single aspect of your application. When I'm working with a student on a resume, the first thing I say to the student is the school doesn't want a recapitulation of your activity section. So what can we add that is new, that is authentic, and elevates your value? Now, this applies to the personal statement. It applies to the custom prompts. It applies to the additional information section, and really any written portion of the application. Tell me something I don't know. Friends, one of the main things that is in the forefront of my mind for every single podcast is what can I share with our listeners that they don't know? So I'm not wasting your precious time. And that is how I want students to think in their application, throughout their application, especially in the written portions. What can I share about myself that's authentic, that you, the admission officer, don't know about me? And how can I be authentic? And how can I be unique? And how can I be distinctive? And how can I elevate my value by being my unique self? That is the test for all written parts of the application. And it even extends to things like resumes. That doesn't mean you don't say anything in a resume that's already in the activity section, but it means you're looking for ways to include parts about yourself that add value so the admission officers think, gee, I'm really glad I glanced here because I wouldn't have known this. Yeah, those are apples and oranges. I'm personally, I really like it when information sessions do some real kind of coaching and give some real guidance on what the school's looking for, how they're distinctive, and even give some tips on applying. I really appreciate those. They're rare, but they're out there. I had a student I'm working with this year who told me that when they visited Cornell told them, don't just list a professor and bounce around, because we see that a lot. People will, know why you're interested in the course. Just, I want to take that. They think the student thinks you're impressing them, that you've done a little bit of research to find out, but I'm not learning anything about you. And occasionally some schools will come right out and just say it, like, we already know what you said. We already know about us. I'm trying to learn about you. And that's a model I see students use out there. They just bounce around from professor to professor and name drop without any reflection. It's one of the more common mistakes I see on my end.
I bet.
Now, you brought up something a second ago that I think is really important. I'm glad you said that. So just like I said, very rarely can you take something and repurpose it. You can take chunks of something. You said topic sentence. You can even take more sometimes, right? That's why a lot of times it does get easier for students that are writing a lot of these custom prompts. It can get easier as you go on because
Yes.
you can say, okay, I've written something like that. And so I can take that concept and then just customize it to the school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's no reason why that can't work as long as the student is being careful. And again, I find that early in the application season, you see a lot more of that because these are the first applications the kids are working on. And I think by the time they get to January, they may have been turned down somewhere else early. And maybe a college was on their list initially, but they just suddenly are going to go ahead with the application. It can take on that rush. The other thing, Mark, that I think is a very obvious and avoidable problem is what a lot of colleges call the why this major or the rationale for major, because colleges are using that response to determine academic fit.
Mm-hmm.
And also, some programs of study are much more competitive than others. So it's a two-pronged evaluation. One is if you're applying to an overrepresented, more competitive field of study, even within the liberal arts, a lot of people say, oh, well, that would be business, engineering, nursing, maybe journalism. Yes, it is. It truly is. But it also applies within whether a whole college is the College of Arts and Sciences or within the Arts and Sciences division of study in a more comprehensive university.
I've had quite a few schools. Like I'm coming to mind. A couple that come to mind immediately are Texas, Austin, North Carolina State, that have explicitly told me how competitive psychology is.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's everybody. It's like the default major. You're better off with undecided, truthfully, if you don't have a strong understanding and defense for, I would say, psychology, economics,
Oh yeah,
neuroscience, and I'm not including the business and engineering
sure,
fields. Those
sure,
are kind of
sure.
in a class
Yeah,
by.
there's the professional majors like engineering, computer science, business, nursing, architecture.
Yes,
Those that group's almost always tough at MITS.
yes, because they're limited. So they're more space limited.
Yeah.
Also, for the professional fields of study, colleges expect you to have a good handle on um, the skills and the curiosities that a successful student in those fields would have. The downfall for psychology is when students in their why this major writing say, I'm kind of already the clinical psychologist of my friend group.
Mhm.
People, and this is so common, Mark, I can't even begin to tell you how common it is, my friends turn to me. And you know what? That's lovely. But you have no idea what a psychology major actually studies if you're saying that in your Common App. And it's a real exposure of something that does not make a good impression. Also, colleges are definitely looking for evidence that you have, of course, taken some classes that might have actually shown you that this is a possible likely match for you, but also something experiential where you have sought an experience, whether it's a club at school or a volunteer experience, or maybe high level it would be an internship or a summer job, but it could be, if you're expressing interest in journalism and communication, there's kind of an obvious way to dig into that in high school, with the publications at the high school. But if there's no evidence at all, and this is true of psychology in particular, that you have sought coursework or some kind of exposure through volunteer work, or, you can't say, well, I'm going to go sit in on, psychiatric, evaluations. No, but there are lots of ways that students can test out an area of study and see what the actual day-to-day informational interviews. I'm very impressed when I see that.
Here's a question for you, because you've read in multiple capacities. When I think of Bates, a traditional liberal arts college, right? Do you think there's a difference on the point that you last made, seeking out evidence at a liberal arts school versus, let's say, a university that admits by college or admits by major?
I would say every university basically has a liberal arts college inside of it, right? Unless perhaps you were an institute of technology, right?
Right.
So universities divide the academics up into large groupings of study, like we said earlier, the business, the engineering, journalism and communications, however, architecture, however, they may even pull the arts out if they offer the BFA degrees or the Bachelor of Music. But the liberal arts division of study, it could be a standalone college. Think about, Haverford, Bryn Mawr, Franklin and Marshall, Bates, Colby, Old Wonderful, Grinnell, Pomona. These are schools that may have some professional fields of study, but largely they don't.
Right. And see, I find that those schools, like, they almost work off of the assumption that you're probably going to change your mind. And that's perfectly fine. 70% of our people do come in and change their mind. And so lining up, and of course, every school is different. Even with this, we have to be careful. But holding you to task for demonstrating your interest in psychology at a liberal arts school compared to a school that's admitting by major college, I think there's a distinction, but it's also heavily influenced by selectivity. Because the more selective the schools are,
Yep,
the more everything starts coming into play.
exactly. And I would say that, like we said, biology, psychology, economics, and computer science within a college of liberal arts, it could be a standalone college of liberal arts, okay, is still more competitive because these are overrepresented in the applicant pool. And that's why I always say to students that if it's just at this point a dream, but you don't really have any evidence to support your understanding of that field of study, go undecided and say, I have 3 or 4 interests that I'm excited about studying. I'm really interested in human behavior. I'm really interested in the science of the brain. I'm really interested in public health, but don't apply to one of them, meaning, or don't put it down as your number one academic interest unless you've got some evidence, because your application is going to look weak potentially compared to other students who have really done a lot of exploration.
And here's another kind of angle on this. Not every school asks you what your first choice major is. But anytime when they ask you, that's a telltale sign it has some importance.
Well, don't they all ask, though, at least, what are you interested in studying? I can't say that I've run across a school in recent years that hasn't said, what are your academic interests? You're right, though. There's a difference between what are you looking forward to studying? That's probably a signal that they just want to see what your intellectual curiosities are. And if you have a brain in your head, truthfully, if you're thinking about why are you going to college after all, right? But if then they're obviously saying what's your first choice or your second choice major, then
Yeah, because oftentimes that they're admitting, clearly showing you that's a a lot of times they're going and looking, are you competitive? I think of, like, for example, the UCSD model. You have to list your first and second choice, and they check to see if you're competitive in your first choice. If you're not, they'll go to your second choice, and then they will default to undeclared and see if you're competitive in the larger population. And then you might get admitted as undeclared. And so when I was with them, they said, we say we don't admit by major, but we kind of do, because they're putting you through that test. So I always tell students that's a telltale sign right away. And you'll see it. It's a very common model, especially at universities. First choice, second choice. It's they're not every single thing. I always say they ask for a reason.
You're absolutely right, because colleges have tried very hard to streamline their applications in recent years because it generates more applications, right? The less work a student has to do, the more likely they are actually to follow through, with an application. I remember the year that Boston College eliminated its second essay. It had a full blown second essay as opposed to a short supplement. It was just astounding, um, the increase. And on one hand, I get that, but on the other hand, okay, um, I think another way that I see a weakness in applications is when a student hasn't been really intentional about the things they want to convey about themselves in the application. They're viewing the application as these separate pieces, these little building blocks. You've got the application form, you have the personal essay, you have all these, and then all the supplementary things, and they're not thinking holistically about how it's going to look to the reader. And I get that. I mean, unless someone tells them to do this, Mark,
Sure,
why would they kind of
I
try
know.
and flip the model? But what happens is sometimes you get repetitiveness, and then sometimes you get holes. And neither of those is good. I mean, repetitiveness can provide some emphasis,
Sure,
but additional information can be a very powerful part of the Common App when it's used to augment or shine a light on something in the application that deserves illumination, right? More information, illumination. But when it is simply repetitive, the reader kind of starts speed reading. I mean, I always look at everything. I'm a real believer that the student deserves that, but I'm always looking as I work my way through an application for that additive quality of information. It's almost like an art gallery, and the student is the curator of a one-person show, and they're picking the pieces to hang on the wall that are representative of their, and I like to think of it as past, present, and future. It's like, who were they, who are they, and who were they becoming? And that's really, I think, an important thing for our families to understand, that that's what an admissions person is hoping for when they read an application.
yeah, because it helps you get a sense of what you're getting and increases trust. It's hard though for someone that really just doesn't know what they want to do, and so they're using high school to bounce around and try to figure out what they want to do, and so they're hopping around a lot. And I totally understand that too, how
Yeah.
easy that is to happen. Susan, you said something I wanted to come back to, and then I'd love to get to some of those questions from the listeners that came in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You talked about you're not always able to read by school group, but sometimes you are when you get a cluster from one place. What can you tell our listener that you learn when you read by school group? What ends up popping or getting exposed? I think that would be I think our listener would be interested in learning that.
Well, and it's a little bit of a touchy subject, because I would never want our listeners to think that kids get lined up in some linear fashion within their school group and are kind of admitted on the basis of some kind of ranking. I think a lot of families realize that isn't how it's done because of the variability in admission to fields of study. If you're applying to a Bachelor of Music program, you're not being evaluated using the same criteria as a BS in molecular biology, right? So that's why reading by school group for comprehensive universities doesn't always help the process. I think at smaller liberal arts colleges, it's still very, very important, because you're being admitted to the whole college. Like you said a minute ago,
Sure.
maybe you're interested in studying, Middle Eastern studies or psychology or chemistry, but you're really being admitted to the whole college. The gates are being thrown open, and you and your advisor are beginning the journey of figuring it out. But at, places where you're reading for entry to, engineering, business, or whatever, it takes on a bit of a different form. Even within an engineering program, where I read now, we have some majors that are, we have to really admit pretty deeply because not a lot of kids are interested in them yet. They will be later on. But, high school kids all want to do biomedical engineering. Mechanical is kind of every robotics student, who's done robotics, which is great. But very little interest in chemical engineering coming out of high school because there hasn't been the exposure, right? So universities are always looking for kids who've got the academic preparation, because to get into a college of engineering, you have to have different minimum educational standards than to get into liberal arts. So this is where I hang my head sometimes, because I say, oh boy, the college counselor isn't going to like this one unless they know what these kids are saying, because suddenly the young man who wants to be a, East Asian languages major gets in, and because boys in the humanities are lower in numbers everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everywhere. And then some high-powered, astronomically well-qualified student isn't going to get into engineering, or they may get waitlisted. But that's differential course preparation and differential caliber of academic achievement, and evidence of understanding what the field of study involves. So that's, we also have high schools that have different curricula within the high school. It's almost like applicants are attending different high schools. You may have a alternative high school curriculum within the same building. We have students attending schools that have AP, IB, honors. So sometimes reading by school doesn't really help you make reasonable decisions anyway. But the territory manager has to know this. And that's why admissions people study high schools and they travel. And as we've talked about so often here on the podcast, we rely on profiles, school profiles. And again, I would say to families who are listening, if you are unfamiliar with your school profile, please get a copy of it. The guidance office should be able to hand you one, or it should be on their website. But you should be able to see exactly how your high school, its community, its curriculum is described to the colleges. And if there are any gaps that you as an applicant might want to fill in. I read an application the other day where the student said, I noticed on my school profile that it didn't indicate when, now what was it? Something big happened in the curriculum. Was it they eliminated AP designation? Or I can't remember right now, but
Readers always appreciate those insights.
well, really how else?
Yeah. And another reason why that's important, the variety and, the caliber of profile is all over the place. Some of them are terrible. They're terrible.
Shocking.
Yeah. They tend to be the best, I find, at independent schools and suburban public schools.
But not a guarantee. Yes, I would agree. I would assume that, Mark, but boy, it's sure not a guarantee.
Yeah. And suburban schools with high, college going populations, I find those are the better ones. But overall, most profiles, I require them for everybody I work with.
Right.
A lot of them are they're terrible and they're not that helpful. And you can tell there's probably not somebody in that school who's over the profile that, probably understands what colleges really want, or just wouldn't produce something like that. So I think that point you brought up is really good, that it can be very helpful for a student to draw attention to something that's not that's a question I get sometimes. It's not, doesn't say anything in the profile XYZ. Should I include that? And a lot of times they absolutely should. The things that come up. Friends, when I did boarding school admissions, we only read by school group for the schools where we had a minimum of 15 or more applications. And for us, that was 2 schools. It was the Montgomery School in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, and it was one school that always sent us, at least that, De La Salle Academy, 96th in Amsterdam and the Upper West Side of New York. Let me share a few of the ways their reading by school group helped us. We could see if the school had a lot of grade inflation because we would see the trend of extremely high grade point averages. And the opposite was also true. We could see who had grade deflation. We could also build out models of how students from different schools did at our school. We could only do that, though, if we had a significant number of applications from the school. And that was incredibly helpful. And the best part of us looking at applications is this would go all the way down to an individual teacher level. It could also help a student out because, for example, let's say a student had a grade of 82 in science. That would typically be a low grade for us. But if we saw that the majority of the high achieving students had grades with that same teacher in the same range, we would extend those students a lot of grace. One thing we used to say in admissions, the admission office all the time, is almost a mantra. Every school has at least one really hard grader, and it looks like Miss Johnson, the English teacher, is that person. The other way reading by school group was very helpful for us was with the counselor rec. We could see how effusive the counselor was in the rec for the student. We could also see when the counselor described the student in a way that was nondescript, uninspiring, and middling. This is why when I asked Christoph Gutentag, Duke's dean, for advice for counselors, he talked about organizing the counselor letter in paragraphs by specific aspects of each student. And then he said, an organized letter from a counselor, I think, is very valuable, especially when we're reading 5, 10, 15, or 20 letters from the same counselor or the same counseling team, because it helps us understand each student in the context of their school. Well, Susan, this has been great. We've gone 50 minutes. Thank you for taking time to jot down some observations. And yeah, let's do this again in the future. I like it.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to shine a light on this process so that kids can really feel like they're putting their best foot forward and giving colleges the best source of information for their evaluation. And it's hard when they don't really know.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Back for another question from a listener. Let's play it, and I want you to talk to our listeners about this. Has come up recently in your conversations with students, so why don't you kick it off, and then I'll chime in.
Hi, my name's Alex, and I'm a student in the DC area, and I'm kind of just wondering, like, what college GPA is used for? Like, other than like professional school, does it really even like matter as long as you get a degree, or like how does that kind of work?
Yeah. So thank you for this question, Alex. I think it's a great one. It's so funny that it literally just came up. So it came up in 2 situations for me. I have a graduated student from my last school I worked at who's in her first year of college and was actually fighting with her advisor about what her college GPA might be. And then also, my current school, we teach a college counseling class. And so we've actually gotten into recently conversations about transitioning to college, right? Since most of my students have applied. And another one of my students brought up and asked a really good question, like, wait, like what, like, because, they're in the middle of putting their GPAs on Common App and looking at their, do I get into the school based on my GPA? They're like, but wait, like, when does my college GPA matter and why would it matter? So this is a great one. And for I hope my student who's fighting with her advisor at her college might not listen to this either, but, it is interesting. And it is true your GPA does matter if you're going to go to further education. So, and not just, so certainly law school and med school, that is a large, if not largest component of your candidacy is sort of your GPA and your grades in college. But that's true of a lot of graduate programs, right? It might have, or they might be more forgiving on the kinds of GPA you have, but that's usually something they'll ask for. But there's plenty of graduate programs that are really just going to say, like, hey, we want to see what grades you got in your engineering courses. We don't care how you did in French. Or that being said, my lovely friend who's arguing with her advisor that grades don't matter has zero interest as of right now, she says, in going to she just wants her 4-year degree and then she's out of there. And so she's a little right in that it, I've yet to, my student who asked this at my school had said, like, when I apply for jobs, do I show my college GPA? Like, why would I be, and I do think the vast majority of employers are not looking for your GPA. They might be interested in your coursework in terms of what your major was or what you got to study, what you specialize in. But I will say this, I worked in research for a long time, and guess what? I would hire for my team, the epidemiology team, and my principal investigator would want to know the name of the school and the GPA the student had as well. So it's not unheard of that an employer might be interested in it. But you might be like me. I did not go to grad school until 4 years after graduating from college. And you might, that's to me pretty soon. So what if you decide in your 50s or when you're later in life that you do require a graduate degree? Then you're going to probably wish you did a little bit better in school, especially because if you're applying to graduate programming after many years after, the landscape has changed. So how are you showing that you're admissible and ready to go when some of the classes you took and maybe the recommendations you're getting are not coming from a traditional college background that most of the employers are looking for now, or grad schools are looking for now? So I do think it matters to have pride in it. It can also determine while you're in college. It can determine if you can go abroad. It can determine if you stay at a scholarship or if you're eligible for a new one. So while maybe you don't need to go, drive yourself nuts by maintaining perfect A's, I do think it's in everyone's best interest, whether you're graduate school bound or not, to care about your GPA.
Yeah, I'm kind of conflicted on this because on one hand, I kind of take pride in telling people as an adult professional, I've never ever been asked my college GPA, like ever. Like no one has ever asked me that, right? So I try to emphasize people are a lot more than a GPA in the job world.
Totally.
But I do think we have to be honest about some things. So like you brought up, it's not just the law schools and the med schools and the business schools. I know like Joy went through a very competitive process to get into clinical mental health counseling, and so very competitive with low admit rates, and absolutely the transcript was one of the big things, and you have to do well in your undergrad to get consideration for those spots. So there's that. So you mentioned that. You also mentioned something else. There can be department scholarships that schools can have. It can have a GPA component. I think I shared this on the podcast once. I may not have, but one of my students, who's a graduate of Duke in biomedical engineering, she was unemployed for 5 months. You think you graduated from Duke with biomedical engineering? What are you doing unemployed?
Yeah.
She ended up getting recruited by like this software like boot camp that puts you to this 2 to 3 month boot camp and gives you software, skills, and then they like strike partnerships with employers, and they have employers that are guaranteed to take their graduates. So now she's doing software engineering. She loves it. She's fine. But I'm bringing it up because I talked to her, like, it's kind of surprising to people that you would have a biomedical engineering degree from Duke, and it took like a half a year for things to happen, and then you had to like go get some more additional training. So what she said to me was, at Duke, you need to have a 3.25 to get the internships. And tanked her first year just coming in,
Which happens.
Pratt, it's pretty competitive, and she never had that 3.2. She was like super close to, I think it was like 3.23. So, but she also said all the kids that did the internships got jobs. So here's a case where the GPA didn't lead to the internship, and therefore you didn't get the job because you didn't have the stuff on the credentials they wanted. I was also at Morehouse College in 2019 for like a counselor program, and I was really impressed with their business program and the people that recruit for summer opportunities from their business program. And I was talking with the head of like career placement for the business grads. He's been there forever. He's like a legend. And I was going on, man, you get this place or that. And I was going on, and that's like incredible. And like he really stressed for me for those like the Morgan Stanleys and the Goldman Sachs, all those kinds of people. He was like, they want a certain GPA for those spots.
Yes, I've heard that as
They
well.
want a certain GPA. So then there's also some competitive clubs at some schools that are forays into the business world, and those can have GPA requirements, for them as well. So there does end up being other ways in which it comes in. And it's funny. It's funny, Julia, because I'm not someone who judges people by where they go to college at all, not in the slightest. I feel like most of the time where people go to college is a reflection of their socioeconomics and their opportunities.
Yes.
It's like
100%.
Lots and lots of like really, really smart people that had to go to community college or regional public just because of dollars. But I do understand an employer seeing GPA as a reflection kind of whether you're responsible. Like, I'm not saying I need to see 4.0s. But the person that has like a really low GPA, that may reflect their inability to follow through on some things, and I can understand that because a lot of times in college, like it's about effort, discipline, and organization. And I always tell people, like, how you do in school, there really is a correlation between how you do in school and how you'll function in the workplace. Like, because it's about your habits and your patterns. So I don't think it's super elitist for an employer to want to at least make sure the GPA is reasonable. Like, I have a problem with someone saying, okay, I'm going to take a 3.9 over a 3.65 because that's just a better GPA. Like, that's to me silly.
Right.
But if someone says like a 3.9 versus a 2.9, like, to me, that's somebody who's getting things done, who's handling their business. And I don't want to be naive and not think that will be have correlation to how they would function in a workplace context.
Yeah, and actually that's how this question came up with my student at my current school, was because we were talking about the senior or the schedule in college, and that I don't know about you, Mark, but in all of my 17 years of doing this, when I have a student who does struggle and gets put on academic probation, it's a time management issue. It's never because the coursework is too difficult or and even myself, I tell the story to my students, but I went to a college where I didn't get my first A until I was a sophomore. So I had roughly a B minus, B average, but my college, the grading scale was only C minus to A. So I was actually at the bottom of my class, and I had to appeal to go abroad, even though I had like a 3.2 GPA, which I was feeling myself for. I was like, look at me. Like,
so you almost didn't get a study abroad opportunity.
I had to appeal. I had to go against a board, and then I had to apply differently than my classmates because I was not approved by my college to go abroad. And I graduated with honors. I'm okay, but it took me, I didn't go to a great high school. It took me a long time to be able to get an A range grade. I just wasn't prepared. And so it can, as much as I thought that was a pretty reputable GPA, knowing that the lowest I could have was just, less than a point below that, was then put things into perspective for me.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is do your best. Don't overly stress out about it. But It's a
Yes.
great question, Alex. It does have ramifications and correlates to other things besides just med school, law school, business school, or even grad school, just
Yeah,
general.
that's my GPA definitely held me back. My GRE score and my GPA definitely held me back when I was applying to grad school.
Yeah. And students, we've been getting a lot of student questions lately. This is like 3 that have come in the last 2 weeks.
I like it.
We had the question, that came in about rock climbing opportunities for indoor rock climbing. And then my favorite question of all time came in from a student, which I will always be grateful for. A student sent in a question about how do I get into admissions? I love your podcast. This sounds really exciting. I would like a career in admissions. How do I do it? That's like
Yeah.
literally my favorite question of all time.
Yeah.
And then now another question from a student. So students, come on. We also had another question from a student who, he wanted to, a student that wanted to know about like AP classes. So it's nice. I feel like we're starting to get some listenership out there, especially in the homeschool community. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I always felt like parents will listen, college counselors will listen, but we can't compete with TikTok. And we still can't.
No,
We still can't.
we'll
But at
never
least
get
there's a
there.
sliver of people that want
Yeah.
our deep dives. So thanks, Julia.
Thanks, Mark.
And Alex for sending in that question. Thanks to the generosity of Princeton Review, you're going to get one of 4 amazing books. You're going to have your choice. Do you want the best 390 colleges? Do you want an overall admissions book? Do you want a book on the digital SAT? Or do you want the book on essays that kicked apps? And it looks at 55 essays that students wrote where they had a lot of success using at the colleges they applied to. So just send an email to me at mark@schoolmatch4u.com and put in the subject header Princeton Review Book. And if you can remember the episode number where we aired your question, that would be helpful. And in your email, make sure you have your full name, address, city, state, and zip. And Isabel from Princeton Review will get your book out to you as soon as I hear from you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I don't know about you, but I'm loving this interview that Lynda did with Ben Neely, and we've reached part 3 of 3. So in the final part, Lynda asked Ben whether the new ACT is secure. Can you trust it? Lynda asks if the paper tests ask the same questions as the digital test. Ben explains what he feels are the advantages of the ACT over the SAT. Ben shares his opinion on whether the ACT is going to be appealing to Generation X. Ben has some special advice out there for ACT test takers. And finally, Ben closes with some general advice about the ACT changes. Listen and enjoy.
So students will have, and we'll just go with next September, they'll
Yes.
have options. They can either take digital or paper, and digital should be more widely available come in September. And the platform or interface may look something new that we aren't seeing in April. That could be different.
Yes.
Do you think students will get their results back any more quickly on those digital?
I don't. And I don't know for sure. I will say because they're continuing to support a paper grading process and a digital, and I don't think that they're going to want to have staggered releases. I don't think they'd want to have it where, hey, if you took the digital test, then you get it a week sooner than the paper folks. I think the limiting factor will be that the shipping, mailing, securing, and scoring of paper answer sheets. And I don't expect any change in the timing for that. So I think we can expect this to all be the same. For what it's worth, even College Board with their switch to digital SAT, early on there was some discussion of like, hey, kids could get their scores back in days. It is a little faster with the digital test for SAT than it was for paper, but not yet as significantly sooner as maybe was originally promised. So I think that students should still be expecting 2 to 3 weeks post-test as their scoring window.
With the having both the paper and the digital offered, are they the same questions? So if I take the test on September 10th, am I getting the same questions as the paper as the digital?
Yeah, so we don't know for sure, but my educated guess would be yes, that in general you likely are. There's always going to be those circumstances where there are sort of alternate test forms for things like Sunday testing or for other special cases. But in general, if you're taking the retail September 2025 ACT on a Saturday, I think whether you take digital or whether you take paper, I would strongly expect that those will be the same questions on those two test forms.
Does that present security issues?
I don't think so. No additional ones relative to the current security issues that exist. I mean, to be real, it is already the case that you can go onto social media or certain discussion forums and there are students discussing, they're not supposed to, right? Students sign a
Sure.
thing saying, I will not, but they can be anonymous on social media. And so there are already students discussing and swapping questions the 15 minutes after they walk out of the test center. And with things like time zones, there's potential issues there. I would say the new ACT and or the digital platform doesn't introduce any new security issues, but it as long as they continue to have pencil and paper and digital, and as long as they're not doing adaptive testing, they aren't able to really make meaningful improvements in that security in the same ways that that College Board has been able to, right? Like I think one of the biggest vulnerabilities you can imagine is, and I know there are things like timed lockboxes and this and that, but in order to do in-person testing, you need to mail test forms with the questions to a location. And if you think just sort of basic security vulnerabilities, there they are, and they can't, show up via courier a minute before the test. They're going to have to show up the night before, or sometime soon before. Whereas with College Board's digital testing approach, that is all grabbed encrypted from a server, right? So it doesn't just sit in a box or in a shipping container somewhere. So until ACT moves on, if they ever do, from pencil and paper, they won't be able to see I think much meaningful improvement in terms of test security.
So, yeah, it seems like a lot of work to offer both online and paper. So we've got another 3 years to go in
I
their
mean,
time,
I would say at
maybe.
least. I really, I think it's an interesting thought experiment to think about what it might look like for them to transition. And I think certainly it's easy from my vantage point to say they should just do digital adaptive like College Board has. And I think that solves a lot of the challenges around delivering the test and security and simplicity for the consumer, right? To not have to choose, oh, I got digital or paper or science or no science. At the same time, beyond just their internal philosophy around the digital divide, around access to pencil and paper testing, ACT, just as College Board does, also has contracts with larger entities like school districts and in many cases entire state
Sure.
boards of education, right, where they have contracted to deliver a test in a certain style for a certain number of years, and those contracts are very lucrative. And so I think that's another constraint that they are struggling with is in order to win some of those contracts, they have promised a certain type of test for a certain amount of time, and they can't go back on that. So, it'll be interesting to see. I will just say, from a meta standpoint, I am rooting for ACT. I would love to. I want to see them thrive and survive and go through this, not for any personal affinity, but just because it gives students more choice. The idea of ACT going away as a retail standardized testing option would leave students with just the SAT and College Board. And whatever you think of College Board, anytime you have a monopoly in a certain space, it leads to usually outcomes that are not great for the student or the consumer or the educator. And so I'm certainly hoping ACT makes it through. I think it's going to be, it already has been rocky for them. I think it will continue to be a challenging period of change as they do this, but I'm really pulling for them that they find the right way through. It wouldn't surprise me if they still offered pencil and paper for 10 years. I think that it's, again, separate from whatever philosophy, just as a marketing tool, it is kind of nice to be able to say, hey, here's another key way we differ, to raise the possibility that your son or daughter might prefer pencil and paper, right? Suddenly, oh, that's I hadn't thought about that. My student doesn't like the, learning on the computer as much. I have this other option in ACT. So my guess is they're going to continue to hang on to it for longer than 3 more years, but that really is just a guess.
Yeah. Well, and I'm coming to you from deep within ACT country here in the Midwest. So I'm rooting for ACT as well because
Yeah.
we have a hard time and have for a long time trying to find SAT seats.
Yes.
I mean, not California struggle to find SAT seats, but ACT definitely is the test of choice
Yes.
for most of my area. So overall, with these changes, and I know there will be a lot of people who are excited about losing that science section. What, in your opinion, what is the pro of taking the ACT? What are the benefits of it? The new ACT.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I will answer this question. I was going to say two ways, but that ends up being a pretty long answer. I will answer this question one way, which is assuming that students still need to take the science section. I know that's it's an unfortunate projection, but I suspect that for especially students that are looking at selective college admissions that are current sophomores, class of 27, as they get to their junior year next year, and they're considering tests, I think any of them that are applying to more selective colleges, there's going to be some of those schools that are going to say, hey, our internal research folks have come back and said we need the science section. We can't do the composite without it. So I know that's kind of a bleak projection, but that's my current best educated guess. So if you are then saying, hey, I need to take this ACT with science, it is no longer a pro that you're getting a shorter test. The test is longer. I would say the pro would be that the test might be a better fit for their brain and their skill set and their approach to testing, which is the same answer I would give for the current ACT. There is enough difference in approach of how these two tests, the ACT and SAT, are built, that for some students, it's a fraction of students, but it's not insignificant. For those students, the ACT will lead to a higher score, statistically speaking, even after conversion, than the SAT. It's a more time constrained test, so they're rushed a little bit more, but the question phrasing and construction requires less higher order critical thinking. It is much more skills based. Do you know this one skill? And can you demonstrate this one skill very rapidly without making a mistake? And for some kids' brains and for their psychology, that is a preferable test. They will score better on that test. And so to me, that's the biggest pro. It is unfortunately a pro that you don't know until you do a full length practice test of each test under timed conditions, not too long from one another, within a couple months of one another. And I know that everything I just laid out presents some headwinds as far as teenagers being willing to do that on their Saturday or Sunday morning, and especially when it doesn't count. But enough of them, I think, might find ACT to be a better test for them, that's a worthy investment of time. And that's still probably the biggest pro for the ACT in general. Now, for the new ACT, I think, availability in digital. Like today's 16, 15, 17-year-olds have been learning on computers since they were in elementary school, right? And so I know for a lot of those students, it feels very antiquated and artificial to have a physical thick booklet and a pencil that they're bubbling in, the name of the school they go to and their test center code. That feels very much like things their parents used to do, but that they do not do anymore in the modern app age. So I think that alone is a pro. It's just not a pro over the SAT, right? So if I'm looking for comparative pros, I don't really have any new ones relative to what it is currently for the classic ACT, which is it might be a better test for you if you go take a full-length practice test of each.
Which same answer as 3 years ago. Take those practice tests. And I know students aren't excited about them. Parents' bribery works, whatever. And I have to tell you, you mentioned, those bubble tests, those Scantron tests, and I started sweating because I remember those. I remember trying to make sure you've colored in the right bubble for the right question. And then if you get it wrong, you've got to go back and the clock is ticking. And
it is not, again, I'm not discounting what ACT has said about wanting to preserve pencil and paper. I don't think that's nothing, but I will say the more I have spent time with today's 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old learners and observed what they do and talk to them about their learning process, it can be really easy for us as adults to not have a good frame of reference for their lived experience. And for many of them, it's very strange for them to all the things you just described, which I intimately remember doing all of those. And what color was the ink? And is it pencil? And did you bubble it in all the
Is
way?
this a number 2 pencil? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
not.
I mean, I'll just say as an anecdote, my son took AP exams this past spring during the end of his junior year, spring 24. And he had 2 exams that were offered digital at his school, and the other 2 were paper. And it called in a contrast for him. He was like, it was an extra 30 minutes at the start of the exam for the pencil and paper ones, while everybody in the room got the code and their name and everything else. He was like, those were like the most interminable 30 minutes of your life, because the day before he had taken the digital where literally you just click start and that's not there at all. And I do think that will be a pressure on ACT in the long run, is just that more and more as humans in the modern age, we are less patient for some of these relics of the past in terms of how tests used to be done.
But that's also why Gen X is really the unsung heroes of our
I
time.
am with you. I'm 100% with you.
Well, Ben, so again, takeaways. So when I talk to parents, I am going to say, don't sweat it too much until September of 25. And more than likely, you're going to want to plan on that science section just to be safe.
Yep.
And we don't really know what the colleges are going to say about too much of anything.
I think that's all spot on. Yeah. The only thing I would add is, and I would emphasize, especially if the student is a current sophomore or younger, like, watch this space. There is a possibility that there'll be a new concordance study, and that will lead colleges and universities to say that they're okay without the science section broadly. Maybe we just don't know. But I think the other 2 points you made, I believe, are the right conclusions to draw right now. And then, but certainly for juniors, current juniors, for current sophomores, it's, listen to the Your College Bound Kid episode 12 months from now. That'll be the other advice.
I love that advice. Good job, Ben. The check is in the mail.
You're welcome.
All right, Ben, is there anything else that I haven't asked? Anything else I should know about, or our listeners should know about?
I think that's mostly it. I would just say, it's really easy, I've observed, for folks like me or you, counselors, educators that are not current students, to maybe get a little more wound up about some of these changes, especially the move to digital, or, whether it's adaptive on the SAT. These changes maybe feel more profound to us than they actually manifest for kids. That's been my observation, that today's kids, there is a lot of resilience there still, despite some recent challenges. And there's especially a lot of adaptability around this sort of change at age 16 that maybe at age 46 is not exactly the same with our brains and where they're at, the neuroplasticity, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can all take a deep breath, and we can accept that broadly speaking, whether it's the SAT changes or these ACT changes, I think we're actually heading in a good direction for kids in terms of the tests and flexibility. Moving to make them shorter is just a good thing in general. And so let's give them the grace to roll with these changes, and don't, I think something I always remind myself as a parent especially is not to take any of my anxieties or my fears and just by default project them onto my kid, sort of starting from a place of like, hey, let's be real about these changes, but I don't, even if they freak me out, I don't want to start by laying that on them, at least not in the first sentence. So
that's a wonderful note to end on, a calming note. Thank you. So, Ben, as a repeat YCBK guest, you are off the hook for answering our hot seat questions.
Phew.
I know, right? But I just want to say thank you so much for, again, sharing your time, your insight, your wisdom, and walking us through this upcoming change.
It's been my pleasure, Lynda. I really appreciate being here.
All right. We'll see you again. Take care.
Take care.
Friends, on Monday's episode, Susan and I will answer a question from a listener. Stacy from California sent in. And Stacy is a college counselor, and she wants to know, why is NYU telling students not to select the prompt topic of your choice for the personal statement? And friends, I'm just going to be completely honest. I cannot think of a time when I was having a discussion on a question from a listener with another co-host where I personally learned so much from one of our co-hosts when they answered the question. But Susan said things in this segment that I just didn't know. And friends, we have a brand new interview. I'm very excited about this interview. I literally just finished it today. We did it over 2 days. It's by Kathleen Delasky, and it's called Who Needs College Anymore? The subtitle is Imagining a Future Where Degrees Won't Matter. And it looks at the incredible work that Kathleen has done in her educational design lab, as well as 150 interviews she conducted with educational experts, college and career counselors, teachers, employers, and learners. You're going to really like this one, and it's one of the most thought-provoking interviews that I've ever done. And I think this is number 219, if I'm correct. So you're going to want to tune in Monday for that. Friends, it's February's Black History Month, as everybody knows. And I want to celebrate one of the great activists and leaders, Angela Davis, by sharing a quote from Angela. She starts out by saying, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change." Did you catch that? I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. But here's the punchline. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. Think about how that applies to your life. We'll see you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.